Hey there everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, with another book to determine, is it worth reading over second breakfast? Or to deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? So let's decide. Today's book is a sci-fi horror brought to us by the minds of Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. A little-known work called The Relic.
Something is studying man.
The Relic was, as I said, a sci-fi horror novel written by Lincoln Preston and Douglas Child. Though, looking into it, it was also classified as a techno-thriller of sorts. I'm not sure what that is, to be completely honest. Other than, I guess, maybe a technological thriller. But if that's the case, I can't really... Whatever. I didn't find much about how the book was received when it first came out, at least not through my normal sources. However, what I could find with today's review ratings is it's rather high. The book itself appears to be the first in a series, with a sequel published in 1997 called The Relic, and becoming part of a series known as the Special Agent Pendergast series. I think that's how you say his name. It's because I guess the series, I've never read anything past The Relic, but I guess the series continues on and follows one of the characters in this book, the character known as Special Agent Aloysius XL Pendergast. Now again, like I said, I haven't read anything in this book, but given a brief glance at some of the other titles in this little series, it sort of comes off like a X-Files sort of vibe to it, but instead of aliens, it's magic and stuff. Now, but today's book will be focusing on the first of it, The Relic. So, where to start with it? Well, where we always start, the cover. I own what I assume... I looked it up. I own a mass market paperback edition, and unfortunately, looking it up, it is one of the ones that use the movie adaptation poster instead of its own original cover. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I personally hate is strong, but I really don't like when books use adaptation posters for their cover art as opposed to just their original stuff. It's a small mental block with me. I acknowledge it's purely bias on my part, but in my opinion, a movie poster rarely tells you what a book is about, especially when you take an adaptation that is nothing like the book itself. A perfect example is the Percy Jackson series. The covers on that was replaced for a while with the adaptation stuff, but the two movies that they made were absolutely nothing like the books. So someone who had said watch the movie and saw the book would think, oh no, I didn't like that movie very much, so I'm not going to like the book. That's not important to what we're talking about. A cover review here, not my own personal biases. Personally, this one's fine. Yeah, I mean, as far as movie cover reviews for books go, it's fine, I guess, is to say. It's just the front is just the cover of the Natural History Museum with the front doors covered in a blood red light. It doesn't really tell you much about the book, and honestly, I would say this cover kind of leans you more towards a supernatural horror story than the sci-fi horror techno thriller it kind of says it is. That's just the nitpick. The back, on the other hand, is real simple. It's just the synopsis, which I've already read in my TBR. 2 quotes from prominent review sites that talk about the book itself, along with another title sequence, which, now that I look at it, this thing has way too many titles on it. The Relic. The Relic. The Relic. Hey, what's this book called? The Relic. It's just like... they put it on you so often, it's almost like they're afraid you're going to forget the title. Which is... that's kind of par for the course of the book. I'll get into that later. Now, for those of you who saw my TBR, you already know the synopsis. I'm going to go through a quick synopsis of the story itself. The story that takes place in this book is a bit simple when you sort of just lay it out on the table. It's about people attempting to survive a preternaturally powerful predator that is set loose in the museum during a packed special event. It follows the story from the first murders, a pair of young boys who managed to sneak into the museum after hours and get caught by the monster, all the way to a week later during the event itself. The story follows a couple groups of people, but really the only important one is the grad student Margot Green, Special Agent Pendergast, as mentioned before, and Dr. Frock, her mentor, as they attempt to catch the creature and kill it for others to survive. They're the ones who ultimately, I think, push the story forward the most, and probably the most important characters. The others, after a certain point, just sort of feel like they exist, which I'll get into that a little bit more later. The book itself is mostly the lead up to that event. Now, for the most part, I enjoyed this book. When the stuff hits the fan, the atmosphere is tense and taut, and it had me engaged from the moment that the security systems failed to the last page of the book. It doesn't get too heavy-handed on the gore, which I do appreciate, at least when it comes to the people. It does kind of just become a little more descriptive when it comes to describing dead animals. I personally don't like that, but I acknowledge it's better than talking about how the people are always getting gored, like some horrors think it makes it scary. And some of the scenes where the monster, known as the Mbwan, I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say Mbwan and hope that's right, or he who walks on fours, is killing when it's killing people, it's very well written and suspenseful, particularly where the SWAT team engages and fails to kill it. I also, for the most part, enjoyed almost all the characters, liking those I was supposed to, while also disliking those I wasn't. The investigation up to the creature reveal is also actually somewhat interesting, as Margot Green and Dr. Frock try to piece together just what this is, because they go into it assuming that it's a creature from the start. While you also have D'Agosta, who is the lieutenant within the police department helping Pendergast, and Pendergast himself going at this thinking of it as more of a serial killer. So I think the investigation leading up to it is fairly well, and that's a good thing. Like I said, most of the book is the lead up to the event. Unfortunately, after that, I mostly have complaints. One of the complaints is that the book really likes to repeat itself. Yeah, I was joking with this relic thing on the cover, but that is actually a pretty good metaphor for how the book treats information within itself.
You're repeating yourself, you know that? You're repeating yourself.
You're repeating yourself.
Dude.
You know, no.
And while it does justify the constant repetition, with her characters repeating information to others who don't know it, or learning it for the first time while you, the reader, already knew it, it just happens so often I began to get annoyed with it, so to speak. It's almost like the book is afraid you'll forget this vital piece of information, so it takes every opportunity to be like, hey, look, remember this? Yeah, okay, this. I'm just making sure you remember. It's going to be important later. You remembered it, right? So it's just one of those, it feels like it's bludgeoning me over the head with the information to the point that if it's not relevant later, I will be upset because you made such a big deal about it. Or, to quote a character from the book, yes, this is a full quote from the book, "I can't believe it! Nothing we didn't already know!" Another issue I started to have with the book is that it really stretches the suspension of disbelief when it comes to the incompetent authority figures. At first, the book felt like a breath of fresh air with Special Agent Pendergast and Lieutenant D'Agosta, the two lead law enforcement officers leading the investigation into the murder. They come off as competent and taking the situation seriously, with Pendergast even showing a willingness to consider more out-of-the-box theories rather than openly dismiss them and say, there's no way it's that, stop being crazy. The only pushback they get is from the museum's leadership, which is understandable in a sense because they have a fear about going under due to the bad press that the museum is currently getting, along with the fact that they had this big special event coming up that they'd have to cancel and lose a ton of money for doing so. However, the book then brings in a character known as Special Agent Coffee, who is the stereotypical FBI agent in the 90s movie who comes in, takes over, and proceeds to make the situation worse in every possible way.
Johnson. Oh, How you doing?
No relation.
I'm Dwayne Robinson, LAPD. I'm in charge here.
Not anymore.
I actually had to remind myself that this does take place in 1990 because this trope was just so worn out for me that I just did not like it at all. Actually, funny thing on that. Okay, so this isn't really a complaint, but this book actually gave me the bigger culture shock being in the 90s than Carmilla did, which takes place in the 1800s. Late 1800s, but still 1800s. Okay, what gave me that big culture shock, you might ask? You see, at one point, they're running genetic samples from something they found from the Mabwan, a little claw that broke off inside one of the victims, and they're running a DNA sample to figure out who it is, thinking it's going to be some guy who fashioned a sort of gauntlet kind of thing, whatever. The guy who ran it finds trace DNA of human and gecko. Now, when this is brought to D'Agosta's attention, his first response is, "What is a gecko?" And my first thought was, how the heck do you not know what a gecko is? Everyone knows what a gecko is. I mean, the Geico Gecko commercial has been on for decades at this point. And then I thought, wait a minute. I went, looked it up. Turns out the Geico Gecko commercial didn't actually come out until the 2000s. At the point when this is talking, it is entirely possible that someone like D'Agosta, who's lived in a big city all his life, would probably have never heard of a gecko. And it's just like, I had to sit back and think to myself, okay, that's just weird to think about, that someone doesn't know what a gecko is.
So, you want to change your name? People confusing you with Geico, calling you at all hours? What name would you like?
Komodo Dragon, please.
But yeah, that was funny. I just thought I'd share it. Cutting back to the book, the actual review. It does sort of admittedly use other horror cliches that have long overstayed their welcome by this point, but they probably weren't as overstayed as they were back then. Unfortunately, a lot of the more obvious examples I could bring up to prove my point to you are very spoilery, so I can't bring them up without spoiling the book, for example. So I'll leave them there and just warn you that if you do get into this, at least when I think movie cliches, be aware that this is a very cliched story when it comes to the horror itself. Anyways, the final complaint that I have about this book is it reads more like a mystery novel than a horror book. And don't get me wrong, it definitely dives into the horror element once the Mabwan actually starts attacking. But that doesn't happen until well over halfway through the book. Like, this far into the book, more than halfway through. In fact, I think the part I opened to wasn't even when the Mabwan attacks. So, up until then, the book is mostly dealing with the characters trying to figure out what's going on. Who this is, what creature it is, how it got here, what it wants. It's a mystery novel with horror elements, if that makes sense. Now, admittedly, this is one of the more minor complaints, but I did note it while I was reading, so I felt it was worth bringing up, because if you're going into this expecting a full horror experience, you're not really going to get it. So, with that, I think I've laid most of my points bare on the table. And honestly, when it's all said and done, I'd give the book a 7 out of 10. The book is good. Don't get me wrong, and I can see it, but I can see how some of my personal complaints with the book might be deal breakers for others, though they weren't for me. I wouldn't personally recommend getting into this from a horror angle, like I said, but I do feel that it manages to capture a good atmosphere in when the monster actually attacks. It's not bad, but I'm not really a true horror geek either, so you have to take my recommendation with a grain of salt. With that being said, I think we need to go deeper with the next book. Dive even greater into the darkness, under the abyss. Maybe even get, under the dark. Go into the Underdark. Oh yeah. I got it. We'll go into the feared Dark Elf Sanctuary, the twisting, unforgiving maze of tunnels that crawl beneath your feet upon the planet of Torel. We'll go into the Dark Elves' very homeland. But until then, remember, With every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones.